Hello and welcome back to Theatre Beard. If you're joining us for the first time, this is a YouTube channel especially for students of drama, theatre and the performing arts, or for anybody who's just got a bit of an interest. This video is part 2 of the videos all about Brecht. Part 1 was about his life, epic theatre and the distancing effect. This video is going to be about the strategies and techniques used to be able to achieve the distancing effect, and also how you might be able to use them if you are making a performance in a Brechtian style. Obviously you can watch the video the whole way through, but if you wanted to jump to a particular section, I have broken the video down, and if you check in the description you can see the timestamps for those different sections. So feel free to jump around or revisit the video to recap whenever you like. So let's get started, and we'll start looking at some techniques that Brecht used to be able to distance the audience emotionally so that they could really think about the performances that he was creating. In most conventional performance styles, all of the elements of performance, from the lighting to the sets to the costume design to the sound, all mesh together to make one coherent performance. Whereas Brecht kind of wanted all of these separate elements to kind of bash up against each other so that they're constantly ejecting the audience from this suspension of disbelief, so that they're reminded that what they're seeing is a performance. So we're going to look at some of the ways he achieved this. First of all, we're going to look at narration. So in a lot of Brechtian performances, there would be a narrator on stage telling the audience about what they're watching, and also having somebody tell the story reminds them that it's not real life. Sometimes the narrator would even tell the audience about what's about to happen, a bit like a spoiler. And this prevented the audience from becoming too emotionally involved in the story, because if you know what's going to happen, it doesn't come as a surprise to you. It's a bit like if somebody told you a joke that you'd already heard, you don't really find it that funny because you know the punchline. Same thing with a narrator. If they tell you what's going to happen, it doesn't come as a surprise, so it doesn't have such a huge emotional impact. Another brilliant way of reminding the audience that they're watching a performance is by having the actors break out of character, break out of role, and even comment on the character that they're performing. When the actor breaks out of role, they might even speak about the character in the third person. And I'm really excited that I'm able to give you an example of speaking in the third person right now. And Theatre Beard was really excited to be able to give you an example of what speaking in the third person is right now. So by referring to myself as Theatre Beard, I've referred to myself in the third person. And by doing that, I'm reminding you that that is a persona that I have adopted for these videos. Nobody else calls me Theatre Beard in my real life. You're reminded that it's a character. Another technique was to have the actors speak their stage directions, and this was often used in rehearsal so that the actors themselves could be distanced from the action of the performance so that they didn't get too emotionally involved in the narrative. So, for example, if there was a scene with an argument, rather than having the characters just argue, they might say something like, "She was so annoyed with him that she decided to go up to him and give him a piece of her mind," rather than simply just acting out the scene. Brecht referred to speaking in the third person in one of his essays called The Street Scene, and in that essay he describes somebody witnessing a traffic accident. Now in that example, if you had witnessed a traffic accident and then went to school and somebody asked you what had gone on, you would be describing what had happened. So you'd be saying, oh, there was this one person in a Vauxhall and they drove really fast, and there was another person in a Ford Fiesta and they just smashed against each other. So you're acting out what happened. You're not becoming those characters. Brecht took this idea even further in his writing about King Lear. He said, the actor is not Lear, he shows us Lear. So just like in that road traffic accident, you don't suddenly become the driver of the car. You're acting it out for the person you are telling the story to. Another Brechtian technique was direct address, where actors speak out directly to the audience and they acknowledge that they're a human being, an actor, and they can see them. They're not a character in their own little world pretending that they can't see them. The use of placards and signs were also a really brilliant Brechtian technique. These signs could be simple as handwritten placards that were held up, or banners, or nowadays they can even be PowerPoint presentations and projections. What's really important though is that the sign gives us additional information. It needs to comment on the action that is happening on stage. So, for example, in a scene where somebody might be stealing a loaf of bread, there might be a sign held up at the back that says, "They have 4 starving children at home." Now, that bit of information might not even be mentioned in the scene, but because of the placard, it recontextualizes the action. Because in epic theatre with Brechtian techniques, actors can play more than one character, and this is known as multi-rolling. The actor can do various things to assume the different characters. For example, they might wear a different costume, they might change their voice, they may move in a different way, but the audience are always aware that the same actor played a different character maybe a couple of scenes ago. And again, remember, this is just to remind the audience that what they're seeing is a performance, it's not real life. And another way of doing this with character is by having cross-gender castings. So you may have female identifying actors playing male characters and vice versa. There are some great examples of multi-rolling in the musical Come From Away, where actors play more than one character. Another way of using actors and characters to be able to distance the audience and remind them that they're watching a performance is the use of split rolling. It's connected to multi-rolling. Multi-rolling is where you have one actor play several different characters, whereas split roll is when you have several actors all share the same character. There's a brilliant example of split rolling in the play Amelia by Morgan Lloyd Malcolm, and here you can see an image of 3 actors who all play Amelia at different stages in her life, but they're all on stage at the same time. So the audience know that they can't possibly all be Amelia. We're reminded that they're actors. The idea of epic theatre is the complete opposite of naturalistic theatre, and so in epic theatre performances, the set would be very minimalistic and really just representative, whereas in naturalism, they wanted the set to be as realistic and solid as possible, whereas in epic theatre, you're aware that it's fake. That said, Brecht did like to include authentic elements in the production. This next Brechtian technique is something you are probably very familiar with without even realising it's a Brechtian technique. It's the idea of symbolic props, where the same prop can be used in a number of different ways to represent different things. So for example, this lovely Bluetooth speaker that I've got here, I could pretend that this is a telephone, I could pretend that this is a camera, I might even pretend that it's a sandwich. And in doing so, the audience know that it's a performance because they can see that it's a Bluetooth speaker, but they go along with the fiction that it's a telephone or a camera or a sandwich. With regards to the technical aspects such as lighting, Brecht wanted the lighting to be as simple as possible so that it could illuminate the truth. He personally believed that he wanted to just use harsh white light, whereas nowadays in more modern productions, even if they're using Brechtian elements, they tend to use a few lighting effects. Also, Brecht would be quite happy to see stage technicians on stage, another way of reminding the audience that what they're seeing is fiction. For example, if you can see some stage technicians pushing on a piece of scenery, then you're reminded that what you're seeing is a performance. Brecht would also make really good use of song and dance routines because this was a really good way, again, of reminding the audience they're watching a performance, because I don't know about you, but I very rarely see people break out into a dance routine just on a whim. And often the music would not really match the lyrics. So if you get a chance to listen to the song Mac the Knife from the Threepenny Opera, really listen carefully to the words. You get this jaunty swing track, but the lyrics are really about a murderer and people bleeding out on the street to death. So this mismatch of really dark lyrics combined with a really upbeat, happy tune is really what Brecht wanted. They're kind of bashing against each other. In my first video about Brecht, I mentioned about how he borrowed from the world of cabaret and also the world of silent movies. And one of the ways he did that was by using montage, which is really a cinematic technique in live theatre performances. Now, a montage is a series of short scenes that happen in very quick succession after each other. This allows the audience to be able to compare and contrast those scenes against each other. Now, all of this so far sounds very, very serious, about delivering messages and getting messages across and not letting the audience get emotionally involved. It sounds very, very serious and perhaps a little bit dull. particularly when you hear that Brechtian performances were all about politics and social issues. However, Brecht was really aware of this himself, and that is where Spass comes into play. Spass is a German word. When translated, it means fun. So Brecht wanted his audiences to think, but he also understood that he wanted them to have a good time, because if they're laughing, they're also thinking. So please don't leave this video with the idea that Brechtian performances are really serious and heavy and about social issues. They're actually really entertaining, even if the issue it's about is very, very serious. Brecht was very aware that the use of comedy can help people to engage with social discussion. Also, laughter is the enemy of tension. So if Brecht wanted to distance the audience, a great way of doing that is to make them laugh. If you've got a really tragic scene happening on stage and he doesn't want the audience to empathise with them, then stick in a joke, make them laugh at them instead. So it might be that he would put in a slapstick routine where people are getting comically injured. It could be a stand-up routine, it might be a comic song. And on the surface, these things might come across as being very silly, but actually it's that contrast between the tragic and the humorous that brings about this idea of thinking about that social issue rather than getting emotionally involved in it. Gestus was another Brechtian technique, and it means to gesture, so an action, a movement that really captures a moment or an attitude in the performance rather than trying to reveal anything about the emotions or the motivations of that character. It's worth remembering that Brecht was trying to avoid his actors becoming those characters on stage, and so by having gestures, they were there to represent that character rather than to become them. So, for example, in the Threepenny Opera, the character of Peachum is the boss of all of the beggars, and he takes 50% of any money that the beggars make. He is there in that performance, not just to represent himself, that one boss. He's there to represent all bosses, so that audience members can compare them to their own boss or other corrupt organisations, rather than just one boss in one fictional story. So by using gesture, he might have a particular way of standing, he might be smoking a really big fat cigar, and therefore we stop seeing him as a character and we start seeing him as all bosses everywhere. One other distancing technique was to chop up the order of the story. So in naturalistic theatre, the story happens in a linear narrative. That means we have point A and the story goes along and it ends there in chronological order. Whereas in epic theatre, they may take that one long story, chop it up into bits and switch the pieces around so the story jumps all over the place. There are many, many examples of Brechtian techniques in performance, and one of them you may well have studied or be studying at the moment. Because if you think about the things that I've mentioned already, for example, the use of song and dance, the use of actors playing more than one character, actors playing against their own type, the use of a narrators who tell you the end before we're even there, then maybe that might ring a bell. All of those strategies are used in the musical Blood Brothers, and even though it uses those strategies, it's still classed as a musical when it comes to the genre. So at the start of Blood Brothers, you've got a narrator who tells you straight away at the start of the show that both of the Johnson twins die. You also have adult actors playing 8-year-olds. Also, the sequence of events jumps about in time. We start with them dead and then we go right back to before they're even born. You also have actors playing more than one character, and they reference this in the show. I believe that a doctor appears to visit Mrs. Johnson and somebody says, "Weren't you the milkman?" And of course it features songs and dances, and very often productions have a very minimal set. However, they might be distancing techniques, but I would question how successful they are in a production of Blood Brothers, because very often audiences leave in floods of tears. So while it is a musical about social and political issues, it's not necessarily a piece of epic theatre, it's more musical theatre that uses Brechtian techniques with naturalistic acting. It's all very confusing, isn't it? But these performances exist because naturalism and epic theatre have been around for a very long time, and as time progresses, people's approaches to theatre change and shift, and people borrow things from all kinds of different genres and kind of mash them together as they please. But for you as students, it's really important that you know what these Brechtian techniques are and why people might want to use them. And that is it for this video. Thank you so much for joining me yet again. If you haven't already, then don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Saying nice things is always free, so by all means pop something in the comments. And I've had a lot of feedback about how people are finding these videos really useful, so that's really good to know. So I will see you next time.